Something happens the moment you decide to trust someone with the most significant parts of yourself. A dream you are quietly building, a wound that hasn't fully healed, a version of you that is still taking shape. You reach out looking for a witness, and sometimes you find one. But sometimes what you believed was connection turns out to be exposure. And the thing you shared never quite recovers from having been seen too soon by the wrong eyes at the wrong moment. Carl Jung spent his entire life studying why. And what he found was not what most people want to hear. The problem isn't that you opened up. The problem is that you didn't know what should have stayed closed and why. In the next few minutes, we're going to change that, because some of the deepest losses you'll carry in this life won't come from mistakes you made in silence. They'll come from things you said out loud at the wrong moment to the wrong person. And Jung mapped exactly what those things are. 7 of them. Stay with all of them, because chances are you've already surrendered something by sharing it too soon, and you haven't even realized it yet. Thank you for being here. If this video speaks to you, please subscribe, like, and share it with someone who may need it. And before we continue, I want to invite you somewhere special. I've started a new channel where we'll go even deeper into psychology, life, and the ideas that can truly change the way you see yourself. I would love to see you there too. The link to our new channel is in the comments. Most people believe honesty means complete transparency. They believe authenticity means saying exactly what they think, sharing every dream they hold, exposing every wound they've suffered, and announcing every step they're about to take. It sounds noble. It feels genuine. But what if this habit is quietly sabotaging your life? Think about it. Have you ever shared an exciting new goal only to lose the drive to pursue it? Opened up about a painful experience only to discover later it had become someone else's weapon against you? Announced a major decision and suddenly found yourself defending it instead of living it. These moments seem unrelated. Carl Jung believed they were not. Jung understood something that modern culture consistently overlooks. Not everything that grows should be exposed to the light immediately. Some parts of your life require privacy, not because they are weak, but because they are still becoming. The process of psychological development depends on an inner relationship with the unconscious that can easily be disrupted when the personality becomes overly reliant on external reactions, approval, or collective expectations. There is a difference between hiding and protecting, between being secretive and being psychologically mature. The strongest people are rarely the ones who reveal everything. They are the ones who know exactly what belongs to the world and what must remain in silence until it has grown solid enough to stand on its own. Because every time you expose something unfinished, you invite other people's fears, projections, envy, skepticism, and expectations into a process that was never meant to belong to them. Not every opinion deserves entry into your inner world. Not every person deserves access to your vulnerabilities. And not every dream survives being spoken too soon. In this video, we'll explore 7 things Carl Jung believed psychologically mature people instinctively guard. Not out of fear, arrogance, or manipulation, but because they understand that your inner life is like a seed. Dig it up every day to show everyone how much it's growing, and it never becomes a tree. Psychic containment. That's the phrase Jung used for something most people stumble into accidentally and abandon just as quickly. It refers to the capacity to hold a developing content inside the psyche long enough for it to acquire its own shape, its own force, before bringing it into contact with the external world. Not silence from fear, not secrecy from shame, a deliberate act of custody over something that is still becoming. The mistake most people make with plans is treating them as objects to be described rather than processes to be protected. The moment you announce a new goal, something shifts. The responses you receive, whether encouraging or skeptical, immediately begin reshaping your internal experience of that goal. You start managing external reactions instead of building the thing itself. The energy you had for execution gets quietly rerouted into performance, into defending the plan, into the exhausting labor of making other people understand why you are doing this. Jung observed this through his clinical work. Psychic energy, what he called libido, does not multiply when distributed. It concentrates. A plan held internally retains all of its original force. A plan that has been announced and explained and debated has already dispersed that force into the social field, where it becomes diffuse and increasingly difficult to recover. The well-intentioned question kills more dreams than doubt ever has. "So, how's that project going?" sounds supportive. It forces premature accounting. It demands a status report on something that has no status yet, only potential. And potential subjected too early to scrutiny tends to collapse back into the category of things people talk about but never actually do. Jung described the collective psyche as a force with its own gravitational pull. When you share an unformed plan with others, you are not simply receiving feedback. You are introducing your private process to a field with its own pressures and its own shadow. Most people in your life are not hostile. They are simply carrying their own fears about what is and isn't possible. Those fears attach to your plan as cleanly and invisibly as a virus. The protection this calls for is not permanent silence, it's timing. Some plans need to be spoken when they are finished, not when they are beginning. Others need to be shared only with the one or two people whose internal landscape genuinely supports your process. Most need to be held long enough for you to develop a relationship with them that external opinion cannot dissolve. Look at the plans you keep talking about instead of building. The ones you announce publicly tend to stay announced. The ones you protect tend to eventually become real. If what you're hearing is resonating with you, subscribe to Carl Jung Philosophy and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Some ideas are too important to keep to yourself. The next thing to protect is more personal and therefore far more dangerous to expose. You are not the person you were 2 years ago, and that gap between who you were and who you're becoming is one of the most psychologically fragile spaces a human being can occupy. Not because the change is harmful, because it's real. And because real change, before it has consolidated into a new identity, is extraordinarily vulnerable to the opinions of people who knew the previous version of you. Jung understood personal transformation as a process he called individuation, the gradual emergence of the authentic self from beneath the accumulated layers of social conditioning, collective expectation, and constructed persona. He was careful to note that this process is not linear. It moves in spirals. It includes reversals, phases where the new self is genuinely indistinguishable from the old one. He compared it to a process inside an egg, invisible from the outside, irreversible once begun, but easily disrupted before it has run its course. The people who love you most are often the most dangerous to this process, not because they wish you harm, because they are attached to a version of you that no longer fully exists. They refer to you by the shorthand of your history. They recall your limits. They remember the version of you who failed at the very thing you are now attempting again. When you share your transformation with them, you are not simply telling them a story. You are asking them to revise a model they built over years. Most cannot do this without resistance, and their resistance arrives before they are even aware of having it. This is not cynicism about other people. It is clarity about process. When a caterpillar is inside its chrysalis, it has become neither butterfly nor caterpillar. It is a substance in transition, structurally unstable, requiring protection precisely because it is neither one thing nor the other. The appropriate response to someone asking to observe that process is to keep the chrysalis closed. Not out of shame, because the conditions inside are irreplaceable. Your changing habits are not ready to be discussed. Your shifting values are not ready to be debated. The new relationship you're building with yourself does not need to be presented for social validation at the very moment you are constructing it. What it needs is time inside a protected space where you are the only judge of its progress. The practice here is simpler than it sounds. Stop narrating your transformation in real time. Stop announcing the person you are becoming. Become them. When the change has weight and structure and history behind it. When it is no longer fragile because it has survived, let people see it. Not because their approval matters then, because by then it won't need to. The next category cuts even closer, because it has to do not with what you're building, but with where you've been broken. Vulnerability is not currency. You were taught that it was. That opening up builds connection. That sharing your pain creates intimacy. That the walls you built are the problem. There is some truth in this, but the version most people carry is dangerous in a specific way that nobody names. It doesn't distinguish between the right audience and the wrong one, between the moment that serves healing and the moment that serves only exposure. Jung's framework for understanding this comes from his work on the shadow, the repository of everything the psyche has rejected, repressed, or been unable to integrate. When you expose a wound to someone who has not done their own shadow work, you are not simply sharing your pain with a witness. You are offering them precise information about exactly where you can be hurt. And the shadow has a tendency to use available information, not out of malice, but because that is what unintegrated pain does. It looks for exits. The word Jung used for what happens when unconscious material transfers from one person to another is projection. Someone who has not confronted their own shame will project it onto yours. Someone who carries unresolved envy will find in your wound the confirmation they needed that you deserved it. Someone who is unconsciously threatened by your recovery will, without knowing it, find ways to keep you in the narrative of your damage, because your damage is part of how they understand their own stability. This does not make them bad people. It makes them human. But it makes the indiscriminate sharing of your vulnerabilities an act of self-exposure rather than healing. If someone has ever taken your vulnerability and turned it into a quiet weapon against you, drop 444. My wounds are mine to protect in the comments. Let the Carl Jung philosophy community see how many of us have learned this the hard way. There is a category of people who should have access to your deepest wounds. They are rare. They are the ones who have faced their own pain honestly, who can sit with yours without flinching or rushing to fix it, who will not use what you reveal as an unspoken bargaining chip in the ongoing negotiation of your relationship. These people exist. They are not easy to recognize in advance. The way you find them is not by opening to everyone and seeing who survives, but by opening incrementally, watching how the smaller things are held, and allowing access deeper only when the evidence genuinely supports it. What most people do instead is share wounds in moments of emotional overflow with whoever happens to be present. The relief is real. The release is authentic. But relief and healing are not the same thing. And the person who received your wound in that moment now carries information about you that was never meant for them. You cannot retrieve it. You can only notice the pattern and begin to change it. In the meantime, the wound belongs to you. That is not isolation. That is custody. It means maintaining care over a vulnerable part of yourself until the conditions are genuinely right for that vulnerability to serve growth rather than extraction. The wound that is tended in the right conditions eventually becomes something else entirely. Something with weight and wisdom rather than just pain. That transformation requires privacy at exactly the stages when exposure feels most urgent. The next two things to protect are different in form, but identical in their underlying logic. And most people surrender both of them without realizing what they are giving away. There is a kind of celebration that quietly destroys what it honors. It looks like sharing good news, like letting the people who matter know that something is finally going right. It feels generous and connected, and it silently drains the very resource the achievement was supposed to represent. Jung's concept of psychic energy does not operate the way financial capital does. Financial capital grows when circulated. Psychic energy concentrates when protected and dissipates when verbalized prematurely. The act of announcing a victory before it has been fully consolidated produces a specific effect, a release of the reward response associated with achievement at the wrong moment in the achievement's timeline. Your mind registers the announcement as a partial completion of the goal. The motivation that was meant to carry you through the remaining steps gets consumed in the telling. The achievement most vulnerable to this is the one that is real but not yet stable. You closed a deal that isn't finalized. You've been consistent with something new for 3 weeks, long enough to feel proud, but not long enough to have formed a genuine pattern. You've started something that shows early signs of working. These are exactly the moments when you most want to tell someone, and exactly the moments when telling someone most undermines the process. The external validation arrives, and the internal engine quiets, because some part of you has already registered the goal as partially achieved. This is not superstition. Jung was precise about the mechanics. Psychic processes require a period of development in the interior space before they can sustain contact with the exterior world without being fundamentally altered by it. An achievement that hasn't consolidated yet exists in the same fragile state as a plan that hasn't been built yet. The energy flowing toward its completion can be interrupted by the same forces, others' projections, their implicit expectations, the subtle pressure to perform the achievement rather than deepen it. The version of this that costs people the most appears in creative work. The writer who describes their novel in too much detail before writing it often never writes it. The entrepreneur who pitches their vision in every meeting sometimes loses the vision in the pitching. The athlete who declares the outcome before the competition walks in already carrying the weight of what they've claimed. The telling substitutes for the doing in the psyche's accounting system. Let the achievement become undeniable before you name it. Let it be something people witness rather than something you announce. Now the doubt. Existential doubt, the kind that surfaces in the quiet hours and asks whether the life you are constructing is actually yours, is not a malfunction. It is a signal. And signals subjected too early to the commentary of other people get misread in ways that serve everyone's comfort except the person who most needs to receive the message. The people who love you will try to reassure you. The ones who share your circumstances will project their own unresolved uncertainties onto yours. The ones with fixed ideas about who you are will interpret your questioning as a crisis to be steered back toward the person they already know. Jung understood existential doubt as the psyche's way of preparing for a necessary transition. He described the process of coming to terms with the unconscious as a true labor, a work which involves both action and suffering. That labor cannot be outsourced. The doubt is yours to carry long enough to understand what it is genuinely asking. Is it asking you to leave something, or to change how you exist inside the thing you're already in? Is it pointing at an external structure, or at something interior that no external change can resolve? These questions cannot be answered in conversation. They require quiet and time and the willingness to sit with uncertainty rather than immediately converting it into a narrative someone else can respond to. Before you voice a doubt to anyone, write it down first. Move through it in solitude until it begins to differentiate itself into something more specific. At that point, you may find you have something worth bringing into a genuine exchange. Until then, the doubt belongs to the space where it can be understood rather than managed. The next two things to protect are the ones that cause the most immediate and preventable damage when exposed too soon. Picture the moment you finally made a decision that cost you something. You ended a relationship. You stepped away from a position. You drew a line with a family member. You said no to something you had always said yes to. And then, before the commitment had settled inside you, you told someone. And they had thoughts. And their thoughts created a negotiation you never agreed to enter. You found yourself defending a decision that had already been made, explaining to someone else what you owed only to yourself. And somewhere in that conversation, the decision began to soften at its edges. Jung described the persona as a compromise between the individual and society, an agreement about what a person should appear to be. The persona is not dishonest, but it is, by definition, a negotiated form. The danger arrives when negotiation extends into territory that should never have been offered for negotiation in the first place. Your limits are not a persona issue. They are a self-issue. The moment you announce them publicly, before they have been lived, you have invited the collective into a conversation about what belongs only to you. This applies most directly to the limits you set in relationships. The decision to stop tolerating something, to stop performing a role that someone else has assigned to you, to stop being available in a way that has been costing you more than you've been willing to acknowledge. These decisions, when announced before they are embodied, immediately become subject to the other person's narrative. They become reasons to argue, to guilt, to plead. The moment you say, "I've decided I won't be doing this anymore," rather than simply no longer doing it, you have created an opening for the decision to be undone. The limit that is lived rather than announced is the only limit that holds. This is not manipulation. It is the understanding that your limits are expressions of your internal landscape, not proposals to be accepted or rejected by others. The person who changes their behavior quietly, without theatrical announcement, without seeking permission or understanding, is the one who actually changes their behavior. Everyone else is still in the negotiation, still performing the boundary rather than being it. The same principle applies to life decisions more broadly. The person who tells everyone about the move before finding the apartment is already carrying the social weight of everyone's opinions about their new city. The person who announces the career change before making it is already navigating others' fears dressed up as concern. The person who shares the plan to remove someone from their life before acting on it gives that person time to preempt the cut. The decision made in private and carried out without advance narration arrives in the world as a fact rather than a negotiation. Facts are harder to undo than proposals. There is also something that happens internally when you announce a limit before living it. You discharge some of the emotional energy that was meant to fuel the decision. You feel briefly as though you have already done something because you have said something. The saying and the doing feel adjacent in the psyche's accounting system, and the saying is so much easier. This is the same mechanism that drains unbuilt plans and unconsolidated achievements. The announcement substitutes for the act. Decide first. Live the decision. Let the announcement, if it comes at all, be a report rather than a proposal. The final thing on this list is the one most people have never been told to guard at all, and the one whose loss is hardest to recover from. Your dreams are not decoration. The images that surface in sleep, the symbols that recur across years, the intuitions that arrive without invitation and resist being explained. These are not noise. Jung called them the language of the unconscious and spent his professional life demonstrating that this language carries as much developmental meaning as any conscious analysis. What he also understood, and what most people never consider, is that this language is fragile in a very specific way. It cannot survive premature exposure to the rationalism of people who do not share its vocabulary. In his essays on analytical psychology, Jung observed that the experience of archetypal content is frequently guarded as the closest personal secret, because it is felt to reach into the very core of one's being. He was describing something his patients knew instinctively before they knew it consciously, that the inner life carries a kind of weight that ordinary conversation does not know how to hold, and that bringing it too quickly into contact with everyday judgment tends to collapse it into everyday judgment. The particular danger is skepticism applied too early. A recurring dream that you describe to someone who responds with, "I think you're just stressed," has not been understood. It has been closed. The symbol that was beginning to reveal something about your direction, your shadow, your unintegrated self, has been reclassified as noise by someone with no access to its content and no framework for its meaning. Once you have heard their dismissal, the symbol often loses its hold on you, not because they were right, because their certainty colonized the space where your uncertainty was doing necessary work. You handed them something living and received back something categorized, and the categorization extinguished it. The inner life that needs protecting includes far more than dreams. It includes the sense, not yet articulable, that something needs to change, the longing without a name, the interest that feels disproportionate to its apparent subject, the phrase that keeps returning across months without clear reason. All of these are how the unconscious communicates with the conscious mind in Jung's framework, and all of them require a certain silence around them in order to develop into something comprehensible. The moment you try to explain them to someone who has not been living inside your psychic process, you are forced to translate them into a language they were not yet ready to speak. And the translation always loses the most important parts. This does not mean the inner life should remain permanently private. Jung engaged with it actively through what he called active imagination, through analysis, through the long, patient process of building a conscious relationship with unconscious content. But that engagement moves in a specific direction, inward first, then outward. You develop your relationship with the inner material before you bring it into conversation. You understand it at least partially in the language it uses. Then, if you choose to share it, you bring something coherent rather than something still forming. The difference between describing a dream the morning after and describing what a recurring dream has shown you over the course of a year is the difference between noise and knowledge. If your inner voice has been trying to reach you, and you've been sharing it before you've truly heard it yourself, write 1111. I am the architect of my own awakening in the comments. Let the Carl Jung philosophy community be the witness your inner world actually deserves. Jung also wrote about vocation, the inner calling he described as something that acts like a law of God from which there is no escape. He observed that the smaller the personality, the more the inner voice fades into the background noise of collective opinion, until the person can no longer distinguish what is genuinely theirs from what the group has decided for them. The protection of the inner life is, in this sense, the protection of the calling itself. Every time you expose a nascent sense of direction to someone whose response is dismissal or redirection, you risk losing the thread before you've gathered enough of it to hold. Tonight, before you sleep, resist the impulse to explain your dreams to anyone. Write one down instead. Treat it as though it had something to say, without immediately deciding what that is. Stay with it across days. The part of you that dreams is not less intelligent than the part of you that speaks. It is differently intelligent. It has been trying to reach you. Give it the space to complete the sentence. Everything Jung understood about the psyche arrives at the same place. And it is not a complicated place. It simply asks one thing of you. Stop handing your unfinished self to people who are not yet equipped to hold it. The pressure you feel to explain yourself, to perform your transformation in real time, to share your deepest process as proof that you are worthy of being witnessed. That pressure is not a sign of openness. It is a sign of how thoroughly the world around you has convinced you that its approval is the price of your own legitimacy. But here is what Jung knew, and what the most psychologically grounded people carry quietly inside them. You were never meant to be fully legible to everyone. Your transformation was never meant to be broadcast in real time. Your wounds were never meant to be offered to the first person who asked. Your dreams were never meant to be explained to someone who hasn't earned entry into the language they're written in. Psychological maturity is not the capacity to share everything. It is the hard-earned understanding of what belongs where. And the person who has truly learned that, not just heard it, but lived it, does not become less present in the world. They become more substantial. There is a gravity to people who do not perform their interior life in public. A stillness. Something in them has been allowed to finish forming, and it shows. The measure of whether this reached you is not what you type in the comments tonight. It is what you choose to stop saying tomorrow. What you decide to hold a little longer before exposing. What you give permission to grow in the quiet where it has always belonged. You have an inner world that has been waiting for exactly this quality of attention. Not the world's attention, yours. Give it back to yourself. If this video touched something real in you today, share it with one person who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Carl Jung Philosophy if you haven't yet. And the video on your screen right now will take you even deeper into what Jung understood about the psychology of who you are still becoming.